Welcome to a milk market tidbit for the October federal milk marketing order data that the USDA released this week. And of course, it was all just a little bit late with the holiday on Monday. Now, this data is going to be kind of hard to interpret, so kind of bear with me as we try to drive through these weeds and see what's going on. But the statistical uniform price was 22.45, and we know that that was down 63 cents. And PPDs will be negative this month, and they should turn positive in November when we have class 4 higher than class 3. Now, the reason the data is so messy is we had some heavy depooling of class 3, but actually all of class 4 didn't come back into the pool. So there's just kind of a mishmash of data here. Looks like the federal milk marketing data might be down a little bit, and production is flat. Now, how can it be down? Well, that's because of the depooling, and fat definitely came up this month. So here are statistical uniform prices. Last month was 23.08. We're 22.45, down 63 cents. And then I always like to look at the change because that tells me kind of what producers are feeling. Now, the first thing that we're going to see is this big swath down here in the southeast that actually came up in price. And well, that's because class 1 came up $1.57. Class 1 is always announced a couple weeks ahead of class 3 and 4, so that is going to be a little bit higher for a little bit of while. We did have significant depooling because look at the difference in these prices. 22.85 for class 3, 20.90 for class 4. So you would have depooled class 3, put class 4 back in, but that's not what happened. So a lot of these areas that are heavy cheese, let's take Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, the Northwest. You say, well, class 3 was only down 49 cents, but what happened is they brought in their class 4 and took out class 3, so they ended up with a loss in that switchover. But overall, the Northeast was down 64 cents. I would say that's pretty representative of most of the country. So as we look out further, it looks like we're going to be depooling class 4 pretty heavily. So this is the zone where there is no depooling, and so class 4 is higher than class 3 all the way through October of next year by usually about $2. So again, heavy class 4 depooling for at least the next year. So when we look at the change in daily production, this is what's so hard. Overall, if we look at total milk, it was down about 1.5%. That's why I say that the federal orders were actually down. But if you take the Northeast, which is kind of the bellwether, it's 99.5. These areas in here are all up just a little bit. So it's really hard to look at it. Class 1, 2, and 3 without 4 was at 98%, and class 1, 2, 4 without 3 was 100%. So we're going to be right in that 100% number somewhere, I think. And the thing that's going to make this so difficult is what happened to the class 3 utilization. The Northwest and the central area all dropped the class 3 utilization by almost 6 points. Again, the Northeast generally doesn't depool. That's why it's a little bit of a bellwether, and the Southeast doesn't have any class 3 to depool anyway. So this is the overall look at utilizations, and we can see that total milk came down just a little bit. That's the 98.5%. Class 3 came down significantly. And these are pounds per day. Class 1 came up just a little bit, and 2 and 4 came up with the change in depooling. So I always like to go back to what happened historically, with the USDA number. And if we look at October, historically, we're about 99.7% in change month over month. So here's going to be my guess, which I think we're going to stick with that 99.7. That'll give us about 18.7 billion pounds of milk, and that's going to be about a 0.5% increase year over year because we were down a little bit last year. And of course, I like a 0.5% wiggle room in there. So 99.2 up to 100.2 would be my kind of range. This is a look at the daily production. We've been reasonably flat for the last 4 years. So again, we're waiting to see what happens here in October. Not going to be surprised that we're up because this was particularly a low value last year. That's why I don't like year-over-year numbers. We're going to come up, but it's not the fact that we're up, it's the fact that last year was so low. If we look at the total pounds of class 4, here's our peak up here at 138 million. We didn't come up to that, so we increased the pooling of class 4, but not as much as we would have if we were totally back to normal. And the big change was in class 3 because we just really took that milk out of the pool. We're down to 38% of our capacity here. And so we'll have that all back in November to take a look at what's going on there. And what I'm most interested in class 3 is this is when we added the new cheese plant back in here somewhere. And of course, we've got the Hillmore plant online, 10-15% and increasing from there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to class 3 next month. Class 1 was actually up a little bit. It was about 31% last month. Now, again, if you take a lot of class 3 out, this percentage kind of normally goes up, but it looks like it did increase a little bit seasonally. And down here in the southeast, you can see why they're so heavily dependent on class 1, whereas Minnesota, Wisconsin only has 10% of their milk in class 1, and you cannot depool class 1. As I was entering this data, I was just kind of kept shaking my head as I was entering these fat values because we came up 10 ticks. We were up to 4.22% fat in the federal orders. And if you look at the Northwest, which is always the highest at 4.37, and even Florida is almost 4 at this point, and the rest of the country is 4 with the Northeast at 426. Protein values were also strong. Again, the Northwest is always the highest at 345. And then the Northeast is the lowest at the 327, but again, very strong protein numbers. So I said we had a holiday this week, which gave us statistical uniform prices a little bit late. I didn't get them until late on the 14th. We had the National Dairy Sales Report, but otherwise it was fairly quiet. We're in what I call this dark zone. We'll have a milk production report next week on Wednesday, along with the advanced National Dairy. And that follows a global dairy trade on Tuesday. And it won't be till the following week that get the cold storage report. So I'll get you another milk market tidbit for the milk production report next Wednesday.